The question, though, from downtown, since the election of President Donald Trump, it's been very apparent that he has targeted through his budget sanctuary communities, blue states, blue counties, and the budget he proposed would hit this county exceptionally hard if it were adopted. If we were to lose what is essentially a security blanket from the federal government, with the amount of money that is directly and indirectly put into this county, how would we deal, and how would you deal as a county executive with the sudden loss of millions, if not billions of dollars pumped into this county? And this is not politics in a vacuum, because it's proposed downtown, and you may have to deal with it if you are elected as the county executive. So I started last time with George, I believe, didn't I? So Roger, or did I start with you last time, George? All right, we're going to start with Roger. 2 minutes.
So it is regrettable that so much of what we do in our county today is in reaction to an unhinged president of the United States. And it's not okay. It's the first time in my life, and I think in the life of many of us, that we feel like we have somebody who's literally unfit to be in office. But it is the reality, and therefore we have to deal with it, and we are dealing with it at the county level, and we are standing up for our values. We are not allowing this president to divide our county. We are not a sanctuary county. We are not a sanctuary city. We do indeed cooperate with federal officials when we have people in our system that are a threat to public safety. We notify ICE when we have people in our system who are a threat to public safety. That is what we do in Montgomery County. Our police will never be immigration enforcement officers. We will never assume that federal responsibility, and our police have said to us, if you do that, we will lose this community. We will lose the trust of the communities we need to have the trust of. We are going to, and I would just say to you that you've overstated it fairly significantly. Our county's dependence on federal funds is fairly modest. Okay?
Obviously, compared to others. That we neighbor, you know, indirectly, there's thousands of people in this county that could lose their jobs based on what will happen downtown.
Okay.
The economy could be dramatically affected if these cuts are put into place. So how are you going to deal with that economically? That's not an overstatement. That's under consideration right now downtown.
So do know that, from my perspective, what you've seen Congress say to the president when it comes to his budget is go fish. Okay? They're not buying it, and they're not going to buy it. Okay? These programs.
So you have no preparation if they did buy it. If they
so know that our budget right now is conservative budget. Okay? I just spent all morning with our AAA, with our bonding agencies, Moody's, Fitch, Standard & Poor's, all morning talking about the strength of our county's economy and how we are a AAA bond-rated community, and have been, and we will continue to be. We take seriously the need to be conservative on fiscal issues, and if we have to, then we will deal with what we have to deal with.
Okay. George, I'll let you have the second word. How would you deal with the loss of jobs or money?
Well, first of all, we cannot overestimate the fear that is being experienced right now in immigrant communities, especially in Latino communities. You have mixed families, some of whom are legally present, some of whom are not. We have children who are afraid to go to school. We have mothers who are afraid to avail themselves of prenatal care, which is available under the Maternity Partnership Program, which I have championed every year, because an investment in prenatal care avoids long-term costs in the long run. So we need to communicate that county services are available, and we have communicated that county employees do not in any way enforce federal immigration law. We need to continue to make that clear. We need to do all that we can to build trust in our immigrant communities. The other great threat that we face from the Trump administration is the effort to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. We've basically achieved universal access to health care, not only because of the Montgomery Cares network of community clinics, which I founded, but more significantly, because of the expansion of Medicaid, which Congress wants to dismantle, and the availability of the Maryland Health Connection, which will be severely adversely affected by President Trump's recent decision to withdraw the subsidies from the insurers. I have the most experience in healthcare policy and maintaining access to healthcare for all of our residents will be a top priority for me. If I'm fortunate enough to be elected county executive, I will be in Annapolis, building alliances with other counties, working with our governor, working with our House and Senate leadership to make sure that we do all that we can, even if the Affordable Care Act is dismantled, to follow the course of states like Massachusetts and Vermont and Hawaii, which had exchanges in place and which had near universal access to health care before the enactment of the Affordable Care Act. We are severely affected negatively by the Trump administration, especially our immigrant communities, but also because of the tone in our communities. We have seen a rise in hate crime. The antidote to hate is love, and the antidote to fear is courage. We have to have the courage to express our values and to stand in resistance to the negativity, hate, and division coming from this White House.
Thank you, George. Mark, your shot. We lose it, what do we do?
First, I want to say something about your opening remark to that. If you look at some of the stuff Trump's done.
Can't hear you.
The mic is speaking. Starting again.
It's good county stuff.
Can I get that 2 minutes back
Yeah,
again?
yes, you can. You can go back to give him 2. There you go.
Okay, thank you. When you said in the beginning about, how heavy Trump is hitting the blue states and people like us, and I just got to say, the studies show that oftentimes he hammers the red states worse than he does the blue states, which comes from the fact he has not a clue what he is doing. And I think, what he did on healthcare kind of
Don't start
demonstrates
on that one, brother.
I know, but you get to actually ask him questions, and you don't get any answers. So I guess the question for us is, what do you do if that happens? And I think you've got to get an understanding of what the magnitude of the problem is going to be. We don't get a lot of direct funding from the federal government, so it's not like we're going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars of direct funding to the county government. What we stand to lose is the income taxes from people. What we stand to lose is if people can't stay here, and I've already talked to people who couldn't stay here because of Trump, and they're going back to other places. They're not going to live here anymore. They're going to go someplace and work because they couldn't get jobs that match the jobs that were here. So what we run the risk of is a lot of people, if they start making cuts, the scientists and some of these other folks, aren't going to find parallel jobs in the University of Washington. They're going to have to go somewhere else. And that is going to be a challenge. And, to George's point, we made a really serious commitment to healthcare. And it was the right thing to do. And we've done it for a long time. A lot of us were looking forward to the day when we would just be dealing with a small portion of our population in healthcare because the ACA Act was going to take care of the bulk of our population. And the risk of that changing is really serious. So I expect that we're going to have a priorities discussion. And we're going to have to talk about how much we're willing to cut. Or is there any tolerance in the wake of madness in Washington for increasing revenues in order to deal with some of the things we need to do? And I think people are going to have to ask themselves, what are you willing to sacrifice and give up in Montgomery County that makes this the place you want to live? Or do people have any tolerance at all for changing the taxes in Montgomery County? But that's not a decision that we should make lightly. It's a decision that we have to make, talking to our residents, laying out what our choices are and saying, which way do we go?
Bill? Thank you.
Brian, President Trump is a bully. That is how he treats people. That is how he treats people, whether it's Hillary Clinton or his own cabinet members. He is someone who tries to bully his way into things. And Montgomery County is not going to be bullied into abandoning its values. We are not going to change the kind of community we are. We are not going to suddenly embrace his xenophobic ways. I am proud of how Montgomery County handles immigration. I think Chief Major has got it exactly right. I think we are, in fact, really a model for much of the rest of the nation in how we handle those things. And we're not going to change it. And I actually find it really encouraging to hear all 4 of us taking the same tack. I know from a journalist standpoint you want more differences, but I do like that you see 4 leaders.
I just asked questions, brother.
Yeah, no, I like that you see all 4 leaders aligned in their belief and values. But he's a bully, Brian. You've even seen it. I mean, you've been a subject of some of that bullying, and I think it's incredibly important for the journalists to stand up to it. But as we've already talked about a little bit, Montgomery County is extremely exposed to federal spending. Writ large, not necessarily federal aid, but federal spending. We saw that coming in our legislative session in Annapolis and immediately started trying to take steps. I led an effort along with the District 16 delegation to get Governor Hogan to start actually recognizing the threats that the Trump budget posed to our region and to try to do something about it, starting with NIH funding. The original Trump budget would have cut NIH by $6 billion, would have zeroed out the Chesapeake Bay program. So we tried to get our Republican governor off the sidelines and into a position where he would actually try to do something about it and stick up for the people of this state. So I don't know that if all came to pass, it would be very, very challenging, particularly on that income tax side of things. But that's another reason why we need long-term to continue to diversify our economy.
We're about halfway through tonight's proceedings, and one of the things, if you've never been to one of our debates before, what we like to do is to get people to know these people up here a little bit better than just as candidates. So the next question I have for you has very little to do with politics, but has a lot to do with who you are as a human being. So here's the question. I'm not going to ask you the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow, but will I?
An African swallow or a European swallow?
Anybody who works for me knows that. That's it. Kathleen's like, but I will ask you this. You've got a barbecue. What are you barbecuing? What's the drink? What music are you listening to? And who are you inviting? Now we'll start with Roger.
I'm barbecuing ribeyes. Rare, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm in.
I am drinking a vodka martini, up, dry, with extra olives. I am listening to Bill Evans, who is one of the greatest jazz people you'll ever find.
And who you bringing over? Is this just for you? You invite anybody over this soiree?
I'm having this with my lovely bride, Dr. Karen Berlin.
Okay. Mark, how about you?
So I'm preparing ribs, and I'm going to blanch them first before I put them on the grill. And I'm going to prepare a dry rub and get them nice and ready to go. And when it's all done, I'll hit them with the sauce. I'm kind of into the sweet, tangy sauces, so I'll probably go in that direction. I'm most likely to be drinking either a Moscow Mule or a Dark and Stormy, particularly if it's hot outside, because I find them both refreshing and reasonably light.
And who you invite?
And I'm inviting my coolest friends who can sit around and have serious political discussions and don't mind getting their hands greasy and dirty and can stay at this for hours and hours and hours.
Listening to what?
Listening either to The Grateful Dead or one of my personal favorites, Little Feat, which I thought was one of the greatest bands that belongs in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and is yet to get there. But they're definitely party barbecue band, I would say.
Bill, how about you?
We are probably rocking the coffee rub flank steak at the Frick House. That's kind of my go-to grilling option. It's quite good if you need a recipe. It's anyone. You can make it just chop up a little bit of coffee. You need some sugar in there, maybe a little bit of spice. Definitely not kebabs. I have a really hard time with chicken kebabs. It's just a disaster.
I believe you.
It is. I just give up entirely. My wife buys them and then I have to separate them and then why did you have a kebab in the first place? I'm probably doing a Flying Dog lager, right? It's something local, some of our craft brews. I have absolutely no control over the radio in my house. It is definitely going to be a Spotify playlist that my wife or my children have set aside. We have been trying to expose them to the great hits of the 80s, and it lasts about 12 seconds. And it's funny that...
And who you invite?
Yeah, it's funny when Councilmember Elrich says he's inviting friends over that can talk politics in the wee hours of the night. That's probably not what we're doing. We're probably inviting people who don't want to talk politics. We're probably inviting, our kids' friends and their parents and people from the neighborhood. We like to try to be the conveners of the neighborhood whenever possible, but they come when my wife invites them. They don't really know who I am.
George, how about you?
Well, my wife Soraya and I are very fortunate. We have a lot of family here in the area, and we enjoy grilling food. We'll probably follow the Brazilian churrasco recipe. We'll get a nice cut of steak called picanha, which is very tender and tasty with rock salt and pepper. But my wife Soraya and my son Daniel are both vegans, so we'll probably grill a lot of vegetables. Soraya has 2 sisters and 2 brothers who live here, and they all have children, and I have 2 sisters and my father live here, and my sisters all have children, so we're going to have to get a lot of meat and a lot of vegetables and probably some fish and potatoes. I would be drinking a craft beer brewed locally, either from Denizens, which is less than a mile from my house, or 3 Stars, which is over on the District of Columbia side, also just less than a mile from my house. And I would enjoy being invited to any of y'all's barbecues. I look forward to us all being friends again and socializing together after the primary election is over, and we would be listening to Brazilian music. It might be Gal Costa or Gilberto Gil or Milton Nascimento, probably some música popular brasileiro, one of those artists from the 60s and 70s.
I tell you, I just found out I think all of them are cooks, but
But the question I was going to ask is barbecue a verb or a noun?
Yes.
But I won't ask that one. Instead, I want to ask you a question about transportation, specifically you mentioned about the traffic and congestion, specifically about the $9 billion growth project from Governor Hogan. We have the ICC, it's underused. Are any of you in favor of taking the toll off the ICC to cause less traffic congestion by more use of the ICC? And also the gas tax, which was supposed to be for mass transit. Is it for mass transit? How do we put more money into mass transit so we don't have the traffic congestion? And what do you think, though, specifically about that $9 billion growth project?
we'll start over here with Bill.
Yeah, no, that's an incredibly important question. Traffic congestion and transportation challenges generally are absolutely at the top of our quality of life challenges in this county. I live off River Road, very close to the Beltway, and that stretch of 495 and 270 is an absolute nightmare. Folks that are trying to commute home just from Tyson's can be stuck in that traffic for more than an hour on a daily basis, starting at 3:30. So we've got to do something. We need bold action. I have to give the governor credit for trying to do something about the interstate highways and trying to do something bold, but I don't know that we can even call it a plan at this point. It really was more of a press conference and a visual aid. I am awfully skeptical of that we will be able to financially get $9 billion out of a public-private partnership and not have to spend a penny of public resources.
But his question was, would you want to take the toll off the ICC?
I don't know that that's possible at this point, given the bonds that were floated to support it. So I think we definitely need to do aggressive things, and we've got to get Metro working, right? I mean, that needs to be at the absolute top of the list, is have a Metro system that restores ridership, where people trust it. Right now, so many of our residents.
Trust me, I'll ask you about that one shortly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
George.
Well, I agree that the state needs to honor its bonded indebtedness, and so I don't think that we could remove the tolls which pay for the funding for the inter-county connector. As an at-large council member, I use the inter-county connector with great frequency, and I have the Easy Pass in my windshield, and I find it very convenient. And I'm glad that it isn't as congested as 495. I don't think we should seek a level of congestion on the ICC comparable to the Beltway. With respect to using gas tax revenues for mass transit, the gas tax revenues were essential to putting the financing together for the Purple Line, and so we are seeing the benefits of the gas tax increase. And with respect to the county's own bonded indebtedness, we have more than $100 million in outstanding liquor bonds, which were issued to pay for transportation improvements, specifically the Montrose Parkway back in 2006. And so any effort we make to change the control of liquor would need to take into account that $100 million of bonded indebtedness would need to be paid for somehow. And if we tried simply to refinance that bonded indebtedness with general obligation bonds, that would take $100 million out of our school construction and other capital budgets. So the issue of liquor revenue is not quite as simple as just issuing political slogans. We actually have $100 million in transportation bonds that would need to be paid for somehow.
And Roger.
So I chair our transportation committee, as you may know, Paul, and just last week, my committee sent a letter to Pete and Ron saying about this $9 billion traffic relief plan of yours. My statement today was, it's in the right church but wrong pew. You know, it's like, yes, is congestion, oh my goodness, among the most important things we need to attack? Absolutely. But the notion of 4 lanes on the Beltway, where are the studies that show that that's remotely possible? What's he doing with the American Legion Bridge, for goodness sake? If the plan doesn't include adding capacity to the American Legion Bridge, this will be a nightmare. Our council had proposed 2 reversible lanes on 270 because it is totally an AM peak and a PM peak. Why isn't 2 reversible lanes enough? We had proposed a multimodal approach on 270 that would include the CCT. Why isn't transit a bigger part of this? So these are all the questions that we have about this plan that we think ought to be answered. And there was no consultation, as you may know, with our county with respect to this plan. And the question I have for the governor and for Pete Ron, who I actually do have great respect for, is are we going to have consultation going forward? With respect to Metro, know that the gas tax, the governor has said that he will pay for $125 million more a year for the next 4 years for Metro out of the trust fund. He will find the dollars for it. So like the purple line, the gas tax has been beneficial. And as my colleagues have pointed out with respect to the ICC, you got to pay for it. Okay? The tolls are necessary to pay for it.
And Mark, you found one that works.
Yeah, I'm not going to take a chance on that one. So on the ICC, I agree that we already have this bonded indebtedness. Other toll facilities in the state of Maryland are paying for the ICC because they lowered the tolls in the ICC and never paid for itself. And I'll point out that we neither got the economic development or the traffic relief that was promised by the people who supported the ICC, of which I was not one of them. I think that the governor's, you never guess that. Huh? So in the governor's plan, I mean, I tried to be reasonably gentle when I responded to him. I think it's a good discussion point, but without any kind of traffic analysis, when they first talked to us about what we would do on I-270, Phil and I were the first ones that said reversible lanes. Because you can't build this thing out. At 4 lanes, you're talking about redoing all the overpasses. This thing is going to be an extraordinarily expensive project, and if you don't need capacity in one direction, why build it? And so you can cut this project in half. And I feel the same way about the Beltway, though it's a little bit more constrained in what you can do, and maybe you can get a single reversible lane, but from my experience, I drive this every day from basically University Boulevard over to the council. When I get past George Avenue, even at rush hour, it's not bad going toward Rockville. Going toward Silver Spring appears to be rather hellish. And even though they put double lanes on the exit ramp, that is backing up as far as it did before they put double lanes in the exit ramp. Which gets to my concern is anything you do on 270 and the Beltway is not sufficient for traffic relief. I can speed you to an exit, but when you get off the exit, you're stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic. And that's why I proposed the BRT system in the county, not to get everybody to ride a bus, but to get enough people into rapid transit, treating it in separate guideways so it's not stuck in traffic, to make space on the road, frankly, for the development we plan. We have no room on the roads for the development we plan, and if you're going to try to accommodate future growth, you have to do something on the interior transit network. No one's going to build another lane on Connecticut Avenue or Wisconsin Avenue.
One of the last, in this particular segment here, which is basically about transportation, you, Bill, had touched upon this issue, Metro. Well, our paper recently completed a 6-month-long investigation and a 5-part series, yes, I'm giving us a plug, on the problems in Metro. And one of the things that we found most troublesome about the Metro were 2. One, the lack of transparency in the way that they do things, not only to members of the media, but to other members of government. And number 2, after the safe track study and after everything and closing down the tracks and single tracking and everything, we still have a huge problem on the red line, and they're still trying to fix the red line. This Metro is overseen by, I believe, 6 taxing entities, so I realize that you have minimal input, but what will you do as county executive to make Metro more accountable and to get it running on time and getting it back to speed? Not please don't say back to good, I'll vomit. But we'll start with George on this one.
You know, we're all following very, very carefully a moving dialogue going on about metro governance. We don't really know where it will end up. It's clear that there is going to have to be a dedicated source of funding for metro. I'm very open to how that should be done. I don't think it necessarily has to be the 1 penny sales tax that the Metro Board Chairman is insisting on. I think we can raise revenue in a variety of ways, including taxing the added value of property adjacent to Metro as part of the mix. But we really need the governor to step up to this. Although you said there are a lot of jurisdictions involved, it really is a tripartite agreement between the district and Maryland and Virginia. If I'm elected county executive, I will work very closely with whoever is elected governor next year and will advocate very, very strongly for a new governance arrangement for Metro and for a dedicated revenue source, because it is so vitally important to our Montgomery County constituency. The county executive cannot take a hands-off approach, but we do need real leadership from the governor, I hope in partnership with the next Montgomery County executive.
Are you concerned any about their transparency and the fact that they're still having to fix the red line after they said it was done being fixed?
I'm certainly concerned about the maintenance problems. I'm certainly concerned about long delays. I'm certainly concerned that my constituents can't count on Metro. I'm certainly concerned that you can't leave a late Nationals playoffs game and take Metro home late at night. Those are real concerns. As far as transparency, you know, I was a journalist in college. I'm not a journalist now, so I'm not familiar with precisely what you've encountered in terms of reporting.
Have you had any problems getting information out of the Metro?
I personally have not. I've found their government affairs office to be very responsive to me, and whenever I've had questions, they've answered them promptly.
I hope everyone heard that. Roger, you're next.
So last year I had the privilege of serving as chairman of the board of directors of the Council of Governments, our regional body that really is our entire region, Virginia, DC, and Maryland. And it was our principal focus to fix Metro, to really work hard. We are the only jurisdiction with the subway system that doesn't have dedicated funding, okay? They need more dollars, and they need reforms. The governance situation, from my perspective, is really out of control. And it has been too parochial for too long. We've had elected officials on the board. Let me give you an example, I think a classic example. Paul Wiedenfeld, who's the new general manager, not so new, he is terrific, by the way, just terrific. He shut down the system right away when he found out something was wrong, and he said, I can't live with myself if we don't take care of this, and he shut it down. He's doing everything you would want him to do. And he came to us and he said, I need more time on the tracks. Okay? I don't have enough hours in the day to do the work that must be done. I need more time. And one of the leaders, I won't name him, one of the leaders from the District of Columbia said, and who is on the board of WMATA, said, well, I represent all these restaurants, and these restaurants are going to be harmed. And from my perspective, that captured the dynamic here. That if you're going to serve on the board of directors of WMATA, that is your fiduciary duty, to make sure that that is what is served. And if you are an elected official worrying about your constituents, you need to get off the board. You need to focus on WMATA's needs. So we have that dynamic. We have the dynamic of needing $500 million more a year in order to get Metro back on track. And we just have to own that. And the governor has stepped up. We need DC to step up. We need Virginia to step up. We need the federal government to step up because, oh my goodness, this is a system that actually moves federal workers. So if we can do this, and I think the governor, to his credit, has put a proposal on the table that ought to make this happen. Mark.
So as much as I like the governor's proposal, it's 4 years, and Paul Wiedenfeld will tell you 4 years is not enough. We need a long-term solution to this problem, and this is not the long-term solution that we need. It would be an interim, but if it doesn't follow with anything meaningful, we're still going to be in trouble. I'm a big believer that Metro should have used taxing districts around the Metro stations. The public made an enormous investment in Metro, and the developers benefited enormously from this. JBG and its new partner just sold all their non-Metro properties and are only buying properties next to the Metro, which tells you something about the asset that we in the jurisdictions paid for. And we should be recovering more of that in order to make sure the asset performs and does what all of us expect it to do. So I hope that we come up with a mix of funding. I mean, we may need to do a sales tax, but before I start trying to solve the entire problem on the backs of consumers in Montgomery County, I'd like to see an approach that looked at the people who benefited from the public investment and see how much money we can raise for that before we land this on everybody else here. I think transparency is an issue at Metro. If you really want to ask your reporter, here's a fun question. Ask Paul why they withdrew from the county's lawsuit, again, in the case of the Silver Spring Transit Center. Not only withdrew from the lawsuit at the last minute, but why the agreement is sealed. So we don't understand, so we don't know what they settled for, but they certainly undercut the county's case in trying to get an equitable settlement from the partners in this
And I'll
project.
answer that by saying we filed a FOIA to find that out 6 months ago and still have had no information.
So to me, it's a classic example of lack of transparency, because this was a big deal to our jurisdiction. And Romano was partners with us through everything, signed off on everything, and then walked away from the table and made a separate piece. And I think that was wrong. I mean, the truth of all this is we can't afford to let Metro fail. If you picture Metro failing and what that would do to Montgomery County, let alone everybody else in the region, it's going to be a disaster. So we've got to pull together. I fully favor professionalizing the board. Having political people on the board was a mistake on day one, and it's a mistake to maintain it today.
Bill, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Brian. Let me take a quick step back because some of my colleagues touched on the issue of the gas tax increase and the state revenue increases. I was actually the lead house sponsor of that the year before the governor took that bill over because I knew it was really important to Montgomery County. It was important to the projects that were mentioned. And I got to tell you, there is very little that polls worse than raising the gas tax. Like maybe a spinal tap is less popular than raising the gas tax. It polls somewhere in the like 11% range. People hated it, but I did it because it was important and we needed to have it done. And I do think that helped create some momentum the following year when the governor took it over and muscled it across the finish line. I think that's going to be critical to funding Metro as well as the other projects in the county. I think Metro's got three kind of broad carriage problems. One is the financial challenges that they face, and we've kind of aired that out already. If you remember the timeline, the governor initially, behind closed doors, told everyone to go pound sand. I'm not interested, this isn't my problem. And we see that's kind of a recurring issue with this governor. I don't think he's as wedded to solving the problems of Montgomery County as he is to the jurisdictions that he thinks helped elect him. And then the
But he likes our money.
That's right. And then the Washington Post came out and kind of embarrassed him a little bit. And then he came out and said, all right, well, I'll give you some money to support it over a certain period of time. And I think I agree with what has been said. I would be flexible with where that dedicated funding comes from. You're going to have to negotiate with 3 other jurisdictions. I think we need to solve it. I think there's a governance issue, and I do think we probably could stand for some reforms there, a smaller board to maybe deal with some of these parochial issues that came up. But finally, and this kind of goes to your transparency issues, I think Metro's got a culture problem. I think we need a cultural reset within Metro to be a culture of excellence, a culture of consumer orientation, a culture where we want to deliver great service every day. We value our customers and we value the men and women that work for it. You've probably seen these awful